Hi there, and welcome back to Sleepbound. Tonight, I'm reading Part 17 from Downton Abbey, a part that dips us right back into the tension and maneuvering happening below stairs. Expect a fair bit of plotting, as certain staff members push their schemes into dangerous territory. Let's settle in and slip into the quiet heart of Downton. Chapter 4. Schemes Below Stairs. In Mr. Carson's pantry, the light of a single lamp cast long shadows across the polished surfaces. The butler sat at his desk, a letter spread before him, his expression grave. Thomas and O'Brien stood opposite, watching him with carefully composed faces that betrayed nothing of their inner satisfaction. "Now do you believe me?" Thomas asked, barely containing the note of triumph in his voice. Carson's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Careful, Thomas. Your position is not a strong one." "Don't punish us, Mr. Carson," O'Brien interjected. "It's Mr. Bates who's wanting here." Thomas leaned forward slightly, pressing his advantage. "Tell me, Mr. Carson, do you think it right? A man like that should live and work at Downton?" The butler did not immediately respond. As keeper of the household standards, he was deeply troubled by the allegations against Bates, yet something about the situation and the eagerness with which Thomas and O'Brien pursued it gave him pause. "I will take this matter under consideration," he said at last, his deep voice measured. "You may go." As they left the pantry, Thomas and O'Brien exchanged a brief, satisfied glance. Their plan was progressing nicely. In the dim corridor, O'Brien glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking. "He's wavering, I can tell." "Maybe," Thomas replied, less convinced. "But his lordship's fond of Bates. Won't sack him without good reason." "Then we'll give him good reason," O'Brien hissed, her sharp features hardening in the shadowy light. "I'm tired of watching that man limp around like he owns the place, with everyone making allowances for him. It's time he was gone." Thomas nodded in agreement, though his motivations were perhaps less personal than O'Brien's. Unlike the lady's maid, whose resentment toward Bates stemmed from his close relationship with Anna, thereby threatening her influence over Lady Grantham, Thomas's grievance was more calculated. With Bates gone, the position of Lord Grantham's valet would be vacant, and Thomas had long coveted that role with its increased status and privileges. Their plotting was interrupted by the approach of footsteps. Mrs. Hughes rounded the corner, keys jangling at her waist, and fixed them with a knowing look. "Don't you two have work to be getting on with?" she asked pointedly. "Just on my way, Mrs. Hughes," Thomas replied smoothly, while O'Brien simply nodded before they both continued down the corridor. The housekeeper watched them go, her lips pressed into a thin line. Those two were trouble, always had been. She'd need to warn Mr. Carson to be cautious in whatever they were trying to draw him into. In the small courtyard behind the kitchen, Anna sat on a wooden bench, darning one of Lady Mary's silk stockings. The afternoon sun warmed the flagstones, and the secluded spot offered a rare moment of peace in her busy day. The sound of Bates's uneven gait on the stones made her look up, a smile automatically brightening her face. He approached slowly, leaning on his cane, his own expression lightening at the sight of her. "Taking advantage of the sunshine?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench with a slight grimace. "While it lasts," Anna replied. She set aside her darning. "Your leg's troubling you today." It wasn't a question, but Bates nodded nonetheless. Change in the weather coming, I think. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, a luxury rarely afforded to servants whose days were measured in tasks completed and bells answered. Anna studied his profile, noting the tension around his eyes, the slight downward turn of his mouth. "Something's worrying you," she said quietly. Bates turned to look at her, a rueful smile touching his lips. "Am I so transparent?" "Only to me," Anna replied, her voice gentle. "Is it Thomas and O'Brien again?" He sighed, gazing out across the courtyard. "They've been busy. Carson called me in this morning, asking about a letter they've obtained from a maid who worked in my former regiment." Anna's brow furrowed with concern. "What did it say?" "Enough," Bates replied cryptically. "Old accusations. Nothing I didn't expect might surface eventually." "But nothing true," Anna insisted, her loyalty unwavering. Bates didn't immediately respond, and his silence sent a chill through Anna despite the warm sunshine. "Mr. Bates," she prompted, her voice smaller than before. He turned to her, his eyes troubled. "The truth is rarely simple, Anna. What I told Carson, what I told all of you when I first came, wasn't the whole story." "Then tell me now," she urged. "Whatever it is, it can't change how I feel." Bates studied her face, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I was in prison, Anna. I served time for theft." The revelation hung in the air between them. Anna's eyes widened slightly, but the shock she felt was not accompanied by the revulsion or disappointment Bates clearly feared. "Did you do it?" she asked simply. "Did you steal?" "I confess to it," he replied, his gaze steady. Anna's chin lifted, a familiar gesture of determination. "That's not what I asked." Before Bates could respond, the back door opened, and Mrs. Patmore emerged, squinting in the bright sunlight. "Anna, her ladyship's ringing for you," the cook called out. "And Mr. Carson wants you in his pantry, Mr. Bates. Right away." Their private moment shattered, Anna and Bates rose from the bench. As they turned to go inside, Anna laid a light hand on his arm, stopping him briefly. "This isn't finished," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Whatever happened, whatever you did or didn't do, I won't see you driven out by Thomas and his schemes." Bates covered her hand with his own for the briefest moment. "Thank you, Anna. But some battles can't be won, no matter how brave the fighter." In the servants' hall that evening, the atmosphere was tense. Word had spread quickly about Bates being summoned to Carson's pantry, and though no one knew exactly what had transpired, the whispered conversations and sidelong glances told their own story. Thomas sat at the table, polishing silver with ease, while watching the others from beneath lowered lashes. O'Brien occupied her usual chair by the fire, her knitting needles clicking steadily, her expression inscrutable. William entered, carrying a tray of cups and saucers from upstairs. He set it down on the sideboard with more force than necessary, earning a raised eyebrow from Mrs. Hughes. "Careful, William," she cautioned. "Those are the Wedgwood." "Sorry, Mrs. Hughes," he muttered, arranging the cups for washing. Thomas smirked. "Still in a temper, are we? Thought you'd have got over that by now." William's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond, continuing with his task in pointed silence. "Thomas, never one to let an opportunity pass, pressed on. Must be hard, knowing you're stuck down here while your dad struggles on alone. Can't even help with the harvest this year, can you? That's enough, Thomas, Mrs. Hughes said sharply. But William had already straightened, turning to face Thomas with clenched fists. My father's managing just fine, and at least he's proud of the work I do, which is more than your parents can say, I'd wager. Thomas's eyes narrowed dangerously. Watch yourself. No, you watch yourself, William retorted, his grief-fueled anger finally finding an outlet. Always sneaking about, making trouble for others. Mr. Bates has done nothing to you, yet you're determined to see him gone. William, Carson's deep voice cut through the building tension as the butler appeared in the doorway. That will do. The young footman subsided, though his eyes still flashed with anger. Carson surveyed the room, his forbidding expression silencing any remaining whispers. I will not have discord among the staff, he pronounced. The reputation of this house depends on the proper behavior of all who serve in it. Is that understood? Yes, Mr. Carson, came the chorus of subdued responses. Good. Now we have work to do before the dressing gong. Mrs. Patmore has prepared dinner for her ladyship to take upstairs, and his lordship will be dining at the Dower House this evening. Anna, Lady Mary has telephoned. She'll be returning from London the day after tomorrow. As the staff dispersed to their various duties, Bates emerged from the boot room. Anna, waiting in the corridor, fell into step beside him. Well, she asked quietly. His lordship wants to speak with me himself, Bates replied, his voice low. Carson's told him about the letter. Anna's face paled slightly. When? Tonight, after he returns from the Dower House. Bates attempted a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. Don't worry, Anna. Whatever happens, I've had more time at Downton than I ever expected. Don't talk like that, she insisted. His lordship values you. He won't be swayed by Thomas's manipulations. Bates wished he could share her confidence, but experience had taught him that even the most loyal employers had their limits. And if Lord Grantham learned the full truth about his past, not just the theft, but the drinking, the violence, the utter wreckage he had made of his life before coming to Downton, even his lordship's generous nature might not be enough to save him. After dinner that evening, Thomas joined O'Brien in her customary spot in the yard for a cigarette. The air had cooled considerably as night approached, and O'Brien pulled her shawl tighter around her thin shoulders. Carson's told his lordship about Bates, Thomas reported, lighting his cigarette. He'll be speaking with him tonight. And? O'Brien prompted, impatient for details. Thomas exhaled a stream of smoke, and nothing yet, but his lordship's hardly going to keep a convicted thief in his employ, is he? Not once he knows the truth. Don't be so sure, O'Brien cautioned, her skepticism born of long service in the house. His lordship can be sentimental about these things. Remember how he kept on old Simmons as under gardener, even when the man could barely tell a weed from a rose bush. This is different, Thomas insisted. This isn't about capability, it's about character. No gentleman wants a man of questionable honor handling his valuables, dressing him, being privy to his private affairs. O'Brien considered this. Her sharp eyes narrowed against the cigarette smoke. You may be right, but if not, we'll need another plan. Such as? A calculating smile curved O'Brien's thin lips. The only sure way to get rid of a servant is to have him or her suspected of stealing. Thomas snorted. Aren't you forgetting we've tried that, and it didn't work? But last time we invented a theft, O'Brien pointed out. What we need is to make him a suspect when something's really been stolen. How do we know anything's been stolen? O'Brien gave him a pointed look. Because you stole it, you noodle. Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. Oh, you mean the wine? Yes, the wine. Thomas frowned, flicking ash from his cigarette. But that's the whole point. Bates knows I took it. He was threatening to tell Mr. Carson. Well, he can't, can he? O'Brien's eyes glittered in the darkness. Not if we get to him first. Their scheme was clever in its simplicity. Thomas had indeed pilfered wine from the cellar, a long-standing practice that Carson had never managed to completely eradicate. Bates had discovered this some weeks ago, and had warned Thomas that he risked dismissal if the thefts continued. It had been an unexpected mercy from the valet, who could easily have reported Thomas immediately. Now, O'Brien proposed to turn that mercy against Bates. By suggesting that he had been seen taking the key to the wine cellar, they would cast doubt on his integrity, and with his history of theft already revealed, the accusation would carry additional weight. As they finished their cigarettes, a sliver of moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting the courtyard in silvery light. From inside came the faint sound of the piano. Lady Edith practicing in the drawing room, her music floating through the partly open window. Be careful, O'Brien warned as they prepared to go back inside. Carson may be sympathetic to our cause, but he's not a fool. We need to tread carefully. Thomas nodded, grinding out his cigarette beneath his heel. Don't worry, I know how to play this game. They re-entered the house, returning to the warmth and light of the servants' hall, leaving behind them only the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the night air. In Lord Grantham's dressing room, Bates laid out evening clothes with meticulous care. Each item was placed precisely, each crease smoothed away, each button polished to a soft gleam. If this was to be one of his final acts as valet to Lord Grantham, he was determined it would be executed perfectly. The door opened, and Lord Grantham entered, still in his dinner jacket, from his visit to the Dower House. His expression was troubled, his movements less assured than usual. Ah, Bates, there you are. Good evening, my lord. Bates stood straight, his hands clasped before him, his face carefully composed. I've laid out your things for the morning. Thank you. Lord Grantham hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation ahead. Bates, I've received some concerning information about your past. Yes, my lord. Mr. Carson informed me. I want to give you an opportunity to explain. Lord Grantham continued, his tone measured. Before I make any decisions. Bates nodded, his expression betraying nothing of the turmoil within. What would you like to know, my lord? The truth, Bates, about the theft, about the prison sentence. Lord Grantham's eyes held no condemnation, only a deep, troubled curiosity. We've known each other a long time. I'd like to understand what happened. For a moment, Bates considered telling him everything. The drinking that had begun after his war injury, the bitter arguments with Vera, the slow disintegration of his marriage and his self-respect. He considered explaining how he had taken the blame for his wife's theft of regimental silver, believing that his confession might somehow redeem his failures as a husband. But the habits of a lifetime, the private nature that had been both his shield and his isolation, prevailed. "I regret that I cannot discuss it, my lord," he said quietly, "but I will understand if you feel you can no longer retain my services." Lord Grantham studied him for a long moment. "How could you not have realized they'd discover the loss at once? And to keep them in your house, but you only served 2 years?" "That's right, my lord." So clearly the judge thought there was some mitigating factor. Bates remained silent, his expression giving nothing away as he helped Lord Grantham out of his dinner jacket and into his dressing gown. Lord Grantham sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Bates, we've come a long way together. I owe you a great deal, some might say everything." "Please, your lordship," Bates interrupted, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Whatever debt you think you owe me is long since paid in full. I just want to know the truth." Bates met his employer's gaze steadily. "I cannot speak of it, my lord. You must decide whether I stay or go on the basis of the evidence before you. I will respect that." The two men regarded each other in silence, years of shared history hanging in the air between them. Lord Grantham was the first to look away, his expression a complex mixture of disappointment and reluctant acceptance. "Very well, Bates. I'll consider the matter further. But I won't make a hasty decision, regardless of pressure from certain quarters. Thank you, my lord." As Bates withdrew, closing the dressing-room door softly behind him, he felt the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders. Despite Lord Grantham's evident desire to be fair, Bates harbored few illusions about his future at Downton. Thomas and O'Brien had outmaneuvered him, and the past he had tried so hard to leave behind had finally caught up with him. In the darkened corridor, he paused, leaning more heavily on his cane than usual. The prospect of leaving Downton, leaving Anna, twisted in his chest like a physical pain. For the first time in years, he had found a place where he belonged, people who valued him, and a woman who saw beyond his limp and his reserved nature to the man beneath. Losing all of that would be punishment indeed. Perhaps, he reflected with grim acceptance, the punishment he had long deserved, but somehow managed to avoid until now. Chapter 5. Mary's Dilemma. London gleamed in the afternoon sunshine as Lady Mary Crawley strolled through Hyde Park beside her aunt, Lady Rosamond Painswick. Despite the pleasant weather and the fashionable crowd that filled the park's pathways, Mary's thoughts were miles away in Yorkshire. "There's nothing like an English summer, is there?" Rosamond remarked, twirling her parasol lazily. "Except an English winter," Mary replied dryly. Rosamond cast a shrewd glance at her niece. Unlike her brother, Robert, she possessed a sharper edge, a worldliness born of years navigating London society as both a married woman and now a wealthy widow. Mary had always appreciated her aunt's directness. It was one of the reasons she had extended her London stay, seeking the older woman's counsel. "I'm sorry you haven't received more invitations," Rosamond said, as they passed a group of elegantly dressed young women, who nodded politely in their direction. But then, after 4 seasons, one is less a debutante than a survivor. "My dear, is there anything you're not telling me?" "No," Mary answered too quickly. "Only one hears stories." Mary kept her expression neutral, though inwardly she bristled at the reminder of the persistent rumors that had followed her since the Turkish diplomat's death at Downton. "There's nothing, Aunt Rosamond." Rosamond seemed to accept this, changing tack smoothly. "So, have you decided whether or not to marry Cousin Matthew?" Mary glanced at her aunt in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "Oh, there's no secret that Cora can keep for more than a month," Rosamond replied with a knowing smile. "You'd be surprised," Mary murmured, thinking of the one devastating secret her mother had indeed kept. Then, more clearly, "I've told him I'll give him my answer the day I get back." "Well, it would be very tidy, at least we can say that." The lukewarm assessment hung in the air between them. Mary studied her aunt's profile, trying to gauge her true opinion. "You don't think I should accept him?" Rosamond paused on the path, turning to face her niece directly. "My dear, the question is not what I think, but what you think. Do you love him?" It was a startlingly direct question, one that caught Mary off guard. She looked away, watching a pair of swans glide across the Serpentine. I believe I do," she admitted finally. "But is that enough?" "For some, perhaps, but you are not some, Mary. You are the daughter of an earl, raised to certain expectations." Rosamond resumed walking, her pace measured. "And while Matthew is a perfectly respectable young man, he remains a solicitor from Manchester, the grandson of a doctor, hardly the match your parents envisioned for you. But he's also Papa's heir," Mary pointed out, falling into step beside her. "One day he'll be Earl of Grantham." "Indeed, which is precisely why you must be careful." Rosamond's voice dropped slightly. "A match with Matthew makes perfect sense while he remains the heir. But what if that changes?" Mary's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "Only that life is unpredictable, my dear. What if your father were to have a son?" The possibility, so remote as to seem absurd just weeks ago, now loomed large in Mary's mind. She had not shared the news of her mother's pregnancy with her aunt. It was not her secret to tell. But Rosamond's words struck uncomfortably close to the dilemma that had been plaguing her since learning of her mother's condition. "That seems unlikely at their age," Mary said carefully. "Perhaps, but it's not impossible." Rosamond patted her niece's hand. "All I'm suggesting is that you consider all possibilities before you commit yourself. Marriage is, after all, for life." They continued their walk in thoughtful silence. Around them, the park bustled with life. Nursemaids pushing perambulators, gentlemen tipping their hats to passing ladies, children running and laughing in the sunshine. A world of order and predictability that contrasted sharply with the tumult of Mary's thoughts. Later that afternoon, Mary sat alone in the morning room of her aunt's elegant Eaton Square house. A half-written letter to Matthew lay before her, abandoned after multiple attempts to articulate her feelings. Each draft had felt either too cold or too revealing, neither capturing the complex tangle of emotions she experienced when thinking of him. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. A few moments later, the butler appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Evelyn Napier, my lady." Mary rose in surprise as Evelyn entered the room. Tall and well-dressed, he carried himself with the easy confidence of his class. They had not spoken since the ill-fated visit to Downton that had brought the Turkish diplomat, Kemal Pamuk, into her life, and to his death in her bed. "What a surprise," Mary said, composing herself quickly. I'm afraid you've just missed my aunt." "I know," Evelyn replied, his expression serious. "I watched her leave." Mary gestured for him to sit, intrigued by his uncharacteristically direct manner. "How are your wedding plans going?" "Not very well. In fact, we've decided to call it off." "Really?" It seemed quite fixed at Sybil's ball. Mary kept her tone light, though inwardly she wondered at the purpose of his visit. What a shame. Please. He sat down, placing his hat carefully on the floor beside his chair. "It'll be better in the long run." "Perhaps. I know what high hopes you have of the institution." Her cool tone did not go unnoticed. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "The thing is, Lady Mary, I am here today because I needed to tell you something, face to face, before you went to the country." "Face to face? Gracious me. I've recently heard gossip about the time when I came to Downton with Kamal Pamuk, gossip that I believe has made life difficult for you." Evelyn paused, his discomfort evident. "I've also heard it said that I am the source of these stories. It is very important to me that you should know I am not. From that day to this, I have never spoken one word on the matter." Mary regarded him steadily, her heart racing even as she maintained her outward composure. "Then who did?" "It seems to come from the Turkish embassy, from the ambassador himself, in fact, and his wife." "But who told them, if not you?" Mary pressed, dreading the answer. Evelyn hesitated. "This is the hard part. When I discovered the answer, I debated whether I should relay it, but in the end I feel you ought to know. The suspense is killing me. It was your sister, Lady Edith, who wrote to the ambassador." Evelyn's voice was gentle, as if trying to soften the blow. "That is why people accept the story." "Edith?" The betrayal struck Mary like a physical blow, though she allowed only the slightest widening of her eyes to betray her shock. "It's very hard to believe." "Harder for you than for me," Mary replied, her voice steady despite the maelstrom of emotions within. After Evelyn had gone, Mary remained in the morning room, staring out at the elegant square with unseeing eyes. The revelation of Edith's betrayal burned within her, a cold, hard anger that pushed aside even her concerns about Matthew. So it had been Edith all along. Her own sister, driven by jealousy and spite, had deliberately set out to ruin her reputation. The scandal that had haunted her this season, the whispers, the withdrawn invitations, the careful distance kept by former friends, all could be laid at Edith's door. And yet, beneath the anger lay a deeper pain. For the scandal to exist at all, she had to have committed the original transgression. She had allowed Pamuk into her bed, a moment of madness that continued to haunt her. No matter how much she might blame Edith for spreading the tale, the root of it lay in her own actions. The sound of her aunt's return roused Mary from her dark thoughts. Rosamond appeared in the doorway, removing her gloves as she studied her niece's face. "You look positively thunderous, my dear. What's happened?" Mary related Evelyn's visit in clipped tones, watching as her aunt's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "Well," Rosamond said finally, settling into a chair, "this is unfortunate, but perhaps not entirely surprising. Edith has always envied you." "Envy is one thing, deliberate sabotage is quite another." Mary paced the room, her composure slipping. How am I to face her? To live under the same roof, knowing what she's done? With dignity, of course, Rosamond replied smoothly. Let her see that her petty schemes have not broken you. That would be the greatest revenge. Mary paused by the window, looking out at the gathering dusk. I've half a mind not to return to Downton at all. Don't be absurd. Of course you must return. Rosamond's tone brooked no argument. You have Matthew to consider, after all. At the mention of Matthew, Mary's thoughts circled back to her original dilemma. Accepting him now, in the wake of the scandal, might seem like grasping at a lifeline, a desperate attempt to secure her position before her reputation was irreparably damaged. And what if her mother's child was a boy? Would Matthew still want her if he lost his position as heir? Would she still want him? I don't know what to do about Matthew, she admitted, sinking into a chair opposite her aunt. I care for him deeply. I believe I even love him. But everything seems so uncertain now. Rosamond considered her niece thoughtfully. Then perhaps you should delay your answer. Wait to see how things develop. You mean, wait to see if Mama has a boy or a girl? Mary's tone was dry. I mean, wait until you're certain of your own mind, Rosamond corrected. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, particularly for someone in your position. Once made, such decisions cannot be unmade without considerable scandal. Mary gave a hollow laugh. I believe I've had quite enough scandal for one lifetime. Precisely my point. Rosamond rose, crossing to a small escritoire in the corner of the room. Now, shall we put aside these gloomy thoughts and consider your wardrobe for tomorrow's luncheon at Lady Harrington's? I hear Lord Gillingham might be in attendance, and he's recently come into his title. Mary recognized the change of subject for what it was, a temporary respite from difficult decisions. She allowed her aunt to guide the conversation to safer topics, but inwardly, her thoughts remained tangled in a web of love, ambition, scandal, and betrayal. At Downton, Matthew walked alongside Robert on the grounds of the estate. The morning was fine, the air fresh with the scent of summer flowers. In the distance, the great house gleamed in the sunlight, its centuries-old stones a testament to permanence in a changing world. I want to say I'll make provision for you, if it's a boy and you're pushed out, Robert began, his discomfort evident in his stilted phrasing. Don't worry, Matthew interrupted, sparing the older man further awkwardness. I know you can't. If any man living understands the strength of the entail, it's me. I can give you Crawley House for life, if it's a help. Matthew nodded, appreciating the gesture even as he recognized its inadequacy. Crawley House, while comfortable, was a poor substitute for the inheritance he had reluctantly come to accept as his future. Have you heard from Mary? He asked, changing the subject. No. Have you? Matthew shook his head, the admission more painful than he cared to acknowledge. Mary's extended stay in London, without so much as a letter, spoke volumes about her uncertainty. They walked on in silence for a few moments, each man lost in his own thoughts. For Matthew, the past year had been a journey of unexpected turns. From his quiet life as a solicitor in Manchester to his new role as heir to the earldom of Grantham, he had adjusted with a mixture of reluctance and duty. And somewhere along the way, against all expectations, he had fallen in love with Lady Mary Crawley. By the way, I want to ask a favor, Robert said, breaking into his thoughts. "What's the name of your cook? The one you brought with you from Manchester?" "Mrs. Bird?" Matthew replied, momentarily puzzled by the question. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Bird. Might we borrow her for a time? It seems Mrs. Patmore is in need of an operation for her cataracts, and will need someone to manage the kitchen in her absence." "Of course," Matthew agreed readily. "Mother and I can certainly manage without her for a while. I'll speak to her this afternoon." As they turned back toward the house, Matthew found himself contemplating the uncertainty of his position once more. If Cora's child was a boy, he would return to being simply Mr. Matthew Crawley, solicitor. His brief interlude as heir to Downton would end, and with it, perhaps, Mary's interest in him. The thought stung more than he wanted to admit. He had come to love Mary for herself, not for her position or what she could bring to a marriage. But did she feel the same? Her hesitation in accepting his proposal, followed by her extended absence in London, suggested otherwise. Later that day, Matthew sat in the library at Crawley House, legal documents spread before him, though his mind was far from the details of the contract he was supposed to be reviewing. His mother entered, carrying a tea tray. "You've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes, she observed, setting the tray down on a side table. "What's troubling you?" Matthew smiled ruefully. Nothing escaped his mother's notice. "I was thinking about Mary." "Ah." Isabel poured tea. "Has she written?" "No." The single word contained a wealth of disappointment. "Perhaps she needs more time. Or perhaps she's already made her decision and lacks the courage to tell me directly." Matthew accepted the cup his mother offered, though he had little appetite for tea. "I'm beginning to think I misunderstood her feelings entirely." Isabel settled into a chair opposite him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't believe you did. I saw how she looked at you at Sybil's ball. There was genuine affection there." "Affection, yes. But love? I'm not so sure." Matthew set his cup down with a decisive click. "And then there's the matter of Cousin Cora's pregnancy. If she has a son..." "If she has a son, you return to the life you had before," Isabel finished for him. "Would that be so terrible?" Matthew considered the question seriously. "No," he admitted finally. "I never wanted to be an earl. I was content with my life in Manchester, my work, my independence." "But now," Isabel prompted gently. "Now I've come to care for Downton," he replied. "Not just the estate, but the responsibility it represents, the people who depend on it for their livelihoods, the traditions it maintains." He gave a self-deprecating smile. "I sound like Cousin Robert." "You sound like someone who has found purpose in an unexpected place," Isabel corrected. "There's no shame in that." Matthew rose, moving to the window that overlooked the garden. In the distance, the silhouette of Downton Abbey was visible through the trees. "And what of Mary?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to his mother. "If she only sees me as a future earl, what does that say about her feelings for me as a man?" "I think you do her an injustice," Isabel replied, surprising him with her defense of Mary. "Lady Mary has many faults, but I believe her feelings for you are genuine. Perhaps she's simply struggling with the uncertainty of it all, just as you are." Matthew turned from the window, struck by his mother's insight. "You may be right, but if so, why hasn't she returned to Downton? Why extend her stay in London when she knows I'm waiting for her answer?" Isabel sighed, setting aside her teacup. The heart is rarely rational, Matthew, and Lady Mary, for all her sophistication, is young and inexperienced in matters of real feeling. Give her time. Time, Matthew reflected, as his mother left him to his thoughts, was the one thing in abundant supply at Downton. The great house had stood for centuries, witnessing the passing of generations, the rise and fall of fortunes. What were a few weeks of uncertainty in the face of such permanence? And yet, for a man in love, waiting for an answer that might never come, each day stretched into an eternity. At Downton, Lady Edith sat at her dressing table, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The London season had been kinder to her than to Mary, though she took little satisfaction in that knowledge. Her sister's diminished social success had not translated into greater opportunities for herself, as she had once naively hoped. Anna moved quietly around the room, laying out Edith's dress for dinner. Though Mary's lady's maid by primary assignment, Anna assisted all three sisters when needed, an arrangement that sometimes chafed at Edith's sense of her own importance. "Have you heard from Lady Mary?" Edith asked, affecting casual interest as she adjusted a loose pin in her hair. "She's expected back the day after tomorrow, my lady," Anna replied, smoothing a wrinkle from the evening gown. "According to Mr. Carson." Edith nodded, a mixture of anticipation and dread pooling in her stomach. Mary's return would disrupt the peaceful rhythm that had settled over Downton in her absence. Once again, Edith would find herself in her elder sister's shadow, overlooked and undervalued. The memory of the letter she had written to the Turkish ambassador rose unbidden in her mind. It had been an impulse, born of bitter resentment after overhearing Mary mock her to their grandmother. The words had flowed easily. The shocking tale of the handsome diplomat found dead in Lady Mary Crawley's bed, the scandal hushed up by a powerful family. She had posted it without allowing herself to reconsider, a momentary satisfaction that had quickly given way to a gnawing guilt she still carried. Not regret, exactly. Mary had earned her comeuppance, but a disquieting sense that she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "Will that be all, my lady?" Anna's voice broke into her thoughts. "Yes, thank you, Anna." Edith turned from the mirror. "Actually, no. What do you think of the green evening gown with the cream lace? Might it suit me for the garden party?" Anna considered the question seriously, her natural kindness evident in her thoughtful response. "It's a lovely gown, my lady, though perhaps the blue would be even more becoming. It brings out the warmth in your coloring." Edith nodded, pleased by the suggestion. "The blue, then." "Thank you, Anna." As the maid withdrew, Edith returned to her reflections, both literal and figurative. Despite her complicated feelings about Mary's return, recent days had brought an unexpected brightness to her outlook. Sir Anthony Strallan had called twice since the family's return from London, his interest in her evident, despite their age difference. At 30, Edith had begun to fear that marriage might pass her by entirely, especially with her parents' attention focused on launching Sybil and securing Mary's future. Sir Anthony's attention, while not the passionate romance she had once dreamed of, represented a chance at a life of her own, away from the constant comparison to her sisters. The thought sustained her as she prepared for dinner, where conversation would inevitably turn to Mary's imminent return and the upcoming garden party. For once, Edith had someone of her own to think about, and if Mary returned to find her middle sister being courted by a respectable, if middle-aged baronet, so much the better. Let Mary have Matthew if she still wanted him. Edith had her own prospects now, and if those prospects were somewhat less grand than being Countess of Grantham, they at least belonged entirely to her, uncontested by her more glamorous sister. It was, Edith decided as she made her final adjustments before dinner, enough. It had to be.